I'm going to speak through this mic because I know that you are complaining in the back that you can't hear us, so I'm going to be really loud for this. The first person who asked the question, it's always the most difficult one, and after that, there's like a whole load of hands go up. So someone just be the first person to go a set and ask me a question. There you go.
For the group of activists, and you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
What will be the next stages? What's positive? What will make the change from individuals?
I think I already started to answer this question when I pointed out that Zionism will be defeated on the battlefield by Palestinians. Like that has to be the starting point. So if you're thinking strategically about how to defeat a colonial empire, looking to history is important. Look to Algeria, right? Like look at how many Algerians had to sacrifice their lives in order to drive out the French colonizers. Look to you mentioned Vietnam. 2 million, I think, Vietnamese people had to die to drive out the American colonizers. And so we shouldn't overstate the function of people in the sort of the international community. Like we have our role to play, but if you want to put a number on it, I would say it's 90% on the ground resistance from Palestinians, from Yemen, and all the rest of it. And then that raises the question of, so if it's 90% defeated on the ground and 10% in the diaspora, the question becomes, what do we in the international community do? And I mean, that's a tricky tactical question. I'm sort of straying well beyond my function as a human rights lawyer here, right? I'm basically talking about how do you defeat a colonial empire. And I don't have easy answers to that, but it seems to me that if you look at something like South Africa, the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign did play a role. I don't want to overstate that role. I also think if you look at the Spanish Civil War and the international brigades, it's been really striking to me that there hasn't been any equivalent. There is a marginal call from people in the international community calling for some kind of military intervention, and international law requires a military intervention to bring an end to a genocide, right? So, like, again, I don't really have easy answers. Like, what do I know? I'm just some guy, right? But I have often felt very tempted to just go and smash up an arms factory along with the Palestine Action Comrades. And the reason I haven't is because people in Palestine Action, people in Palestine Solidarity Campaign, people in the workers' movement, people in the trade union movement have said, well, actually, we do also need useful lawyers. So I think that whoever you are, again, I think a lot of the people in this room will already be at the coalface of this kind of struggle. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to enter into a dialogue with you about how do we confront and defeat Zionism together. I don't have easy answers to that, but I think that's a really important question. What is the winning strategy? We have to have these difficult, fine-grained discussions. I do think trade unions have a really important role to play, and I think that emphasizing to ordinary people that they can go and speak to workers in their workplaces and speak to their trade union and try to get involved in the incredibly sluggish, conservative bureaucracies that we call trade unions and try and get them to apply pressure to the British state and to the Irish state and to the Zionist entity. That's a very kind of meandering answer. I don't want to act like I have some kind of easy answer, but broadly, I think the crucial point is to remember that Zionism is defeated on the battlefield, and to find ways to show concrete solidarity to the Palestinian resistance, to whom we should show our critical support.
I think just as a journalist, what I would say is don't look away from it. It's okay, go, God, it's not terrible, I feel really sorry, but there's a real danger of being desensitized to something to see so much, and you can't look away. Those images, as horrible as they are, those people are risking their lives taking those images and making sure they're being shared, so do share them. And also, politicians are employees. They're elected by you, and if the politician who you've elected isn't speaking up and isn't saying enough, you have the power then to pressurise them. You also, by the way, have the power to pressurise media outlets, which are businesses. And if you are pressurising them for to carry the content that you want, well, then that is the easiest way to change that. So, I mean, we do all have a part to play, and it doesn't have to be passive. Not everyone has to go, as you said, break up an arms factory, but you do. Everyone has a small part that you can play in terms of that, in terms of putting pressure on, because businesses like McDonald's have noticed a massive dip in their profits, and that is as a result of people doing what is passive struggle, but it is effective at the end of the day.
Palestine actionists, and I know that there's a few of them actually inside at the minute. So what do you think of, because there has been like a crackdown on activists all over, and even here in Ireland, I mean, me and my colleague here were arrested in Dublin a couple of weeks ago, and we were actually strip searched as well. So what advice like can you give ordinary people, activists like us on the ground who are, you know, trying to do something about these things? And I'm all for the arms factories, by the way. I think that we need to be doing that as well. But what advice can you give like activists on the ground, you know, like us basically?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for your service to the struggle. The first thing is, I think there's a premise of your question that I want to push back against slightly. You're sort of saying like, what advice can I give to ordinary people? Like, I'm just an ordinary person, and I would also push back against this idea. I'm not being too playful, but like increasingly, I think about this idea that I'm a lawyer as quite problematic. Like, without getting too theoretical, there's an amazing book that I would encourage people to read if you haven't already, called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, by this guy called Paulo Freire, right? And he talks about how you have to sort of dissolve the distinction between the teacher and the student and recognize that we're actually all both. We all teach each other and we all learn from each other. And I think there's something similar that can be applied to lawyers. Like, I'm not being too playful when I say that we are all lawyers, right? We're all trapped under these bourgeois imperialist laws, and we have to interpret them, right? And what is a lawyer if not someone who interprets the law? Now, obviously, some of us spend more time thinking about law in a very particular kind of way, and we're involved in the more formal interpretation of the law in courtrooms and such. But we're all just out here trying to work out what is to be done, right? So what I would say is that there's a lot of bourgeois liberal lawyers who think it's their job to kind of smother the militancy of their clients. And I want to make clear that I'm a communist and an anti-Zionist, and I think we should smash Zionism and we should smash capitalism. And so I'm not here to undermine your militancy. I'm not here to sort of to make you feel anxious in a way that lawyers sometimes can. And yet, with that said, you cannot ignore the reality of the state and its laws. Like, they are violent and they're enforced violently and they are enforced politically. And so I think what we have to do is to enter into this dialogue together about what is the valid strategy. Where does the state say the red lines are? How does the state change the way it interprets the red lines whenever it suits it? And that's what the more militant end of our movement is encountering, right? It's like the British state is wielding terrorism legislation to try and attack Palestine Action. It's trying to deny them bail, and so it's stripping away political or necessity type defenses, right? So it's this classic thing where Zionism finds itself in this crisis. It's incapable of defending itself against the critique and the blows that are being directed against it. The British state steps in to try and increase the repressive apparatus to try and stop people like you and me from attacking Zionism, right? So there is no easy answer. All I would say is that I think the function of formally qualified lawyers in this movement is not to blunt the militancy of the movement. And if you think about an organization like, and like you say, the political prisoners who are serving sentences or who are remanded in custody because they attacked Elbit systems and so on, like, there's the strategy of those comrades, at least, was very clear. They were like, fuck the red line. Like, it's a genocide. Go and fight your enemies, right? So I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I can't give you any formal advice because I don't know the specific circumstances of what you're dealing with. All I would say is don't let lawyers blunt your militancy, like, and don't take your lessons about how to defeat colonialism from the British state.
Yep. Yep, there's one at the back there.
No,
Yep.
Mohammed first.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go first.
The question about the case at Bristol University, Professor Miller, I think, and that kind of allowed formally the definition of anti-Zionism to be a protected. What were the implications of that case?
Yeah, it's a very important case. And like, in some ways, we're all just running in the wake of that case, to be honest. It was argued by a friend of mine. So one of the guys that I went to university with that I was mentioning earlier, who said we should just go and prosecute Israeli war criminals, mate. So I may be doxing him a bit, but that's a guy called Zach Samor, who's a British-Palestinian barrister. He argued Professor Miller's case, right? So we had Professor Miller, who was an expert on Zionism and anti-Zionism, instructing a Palestinian barrister, and they just wiped the floor with Bristol University. They didn't know what hit them. And so what we ended up with was this very principled judgment that says, and again, I'll try to avoid the legal jargon, but basically the Equality Act says don't discriminate against people, don't fire someone because they're black, don't refuse to give someone a job because they're a woman. So it's these protected characteristics, these parts of yourself that are so fundamental that you shouldn't be expected to change, that you cannot change or you shouldn't be expected to change, right? So there's 9 protected characteristics in the Equality Act, and one of them is religion or philosophical belief. And that's where a lot of the tricky case law comes from, because again, religion, relatively clear. It's like, don't sack someone because they're a Muslim. But then philosophical belief raises this tricky legal question of like, well, which beliefs should qualify for protection? Which beliefs are sufficiently integral to someone that to discriminate against someone because they manifested that belief constitutes something unlawful, yeah? So we have this whole set of cases to do with basically transphobes, to put it bluntly, who say that, you know, I have a certain belief about the correspondence between sex and gender. That's where a lot of the case law comes from. And what Miller's case was to do with was he said, well, I have a very deeply held philosophical belief that Zionism is extremely racist and that we should oppose it, right? And that he manifested that belief in various ways, including throughout his career as a professor. He taught courses on Zionism. He taught his students to interrogate Zionism, and it was for that reason that he was fired. And the court agreed with him, the tribunal agreed with him, and so we have this very helpful judgment that says, in his particular case, his particular anti-Zionist beliefs were capable of protection under the relevant legal test, and what that's meant. So we talked about the Lloyd's case.
Yeah.
The Lloyd's case was running in the wake of David Miller's judgment, right? Whenever the Lloyd's case came to trial, we were saying, well, it's to put it this way, it's so much easier now for a judge to say, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to agree that in this case, your anti-Zionist beliefs are worthy of protection under the Equality Act. And what that means is that, we're still feeling the shockwaves of that case. And it's not just limited to the employment tribunal. Obviously, he was an employee, he was suing his former employer for sacking him. It has far more wide-reaching consequences. It has consequences for public administration. It has consequences in a regulatory context. Any context to which the Equality Act is relevant, you can now say it's not just that you're discriminating against Palestinians. It's also that you're discriminating against people with deeply held philosophical anti-Zionist beliefs. And the final thing I'll say is that, again, maybe for the lawyers in the room, having just said that we're all lawyers, like whatever, for the formally trained lawyers who are having to argue this in court, I would say that in addition to anti-Zionist belief, if your clients, if your colleagues, if your trade union members find themselves getting attacked for things they've said on Twitter slagging off Israel, another way to plead that is by reference to this concept of associative discrimination, right? So if you have a disabled kid and you come to work late because you have caring obligations, there's case law that says that you're being discriminated against because of your association with a disabled person. And in my opinion, you can suggest that, for example, Mark Bonnick, which is how we pleaded his case, one of the things we said was this white working class lad from London who works for Arsenal associated himself with Palestinians by criticizing the racist apartheid regime as it attacked them. And because he associated himself with Palestinians, that is why he was discriminated against.
Thanks, Frank, as well for coming tonight. Really appreciate you being here. I think you're doing a brilliant job working in enemy territory, and I think the first thing we should say is that we don't accept the terminology and the decisions of the British state as to who's a terrorist and who isn't. This is a state that has committed terrorist acts for hundreds of years and continues to do it today. And there was 10,000 people yesterday in Malawi marching to say that the Shaw Road family should have the right to an inquiry. Is being led by Palestinians and will be led by Palestinians and led by people right across the Middle East, for whom the Palestinian struggle has been a major catalyst. And we have to do, I think, whatever we can here to support them. And people are doing that. And I'm very proud of what we're doing right across Ireland in terms of all the acts of solidarity. We can do more, and I think we have to have the strategic and tactical conversations about what we do next. But I think that we can't doubt the solidarity and the effort that people are putting into it. I think in terms of like what I would like like to see is that I would like to have a pro-Palestinian state in Ireland that would actually act in concert with the Palestinian struggle. We do not have that right now. And for that to happen, we need a different government, and we need a different kind of state. And we have to link the struggle against genocide, against militarism, against war, to the struggle that ordinary people face today in Derry for housing, for decent jobs, the right to go to university and decent infrastructure. And that's what many of us are engaged in. The question I have, right, is I'm actually curious if there's an attempt through the British judicial system to actually say that Israel is actually a terrorist state, because we have all the evidence. I think that the attempt to say Hamas, the British government has no right to say Hamas or anybody else engaged in resistance to the occupation is absolutely right. The hypocrisy is so apparent. But is there any attempt to actually say Israel, because of the international court rulings, because of all the evidence, is actually a terrorist state? And the implications of all this is that if you're somebody like yourself or activists who are put in front of a TV camera or on the radio, it's always the case that the BBC starts out with, do you accept that such and such is a terrorist? And people have to try and figure out how to respond to that. But it should really be the case that the BBC should be allowed to bring on an Israeli representative without saying to them, do you accept that your state is committing war crimes in Palestine? Do you accept that your state is involved in terrorism? Is there any attempt to actually do that?
Yeah, it's a really thoughtful question. So there's so many ways I could respond, and I would love to have a deeper chat with you. But basically, to be concise, there's a few things. First of all, the definition of terrorism in the Terrorism Act 2000 is absurdly broad, right? So, as I said on some right-wing Talk TV thing, like if she wanted to, the Home Secretary could say the IDF or whatever is a terrorist organization, right? Basically, anyone who picks up a gun to advance a political struggle is called by the definition, all right? And so it conflicts with international humanitarian law, which says that you're allowed to pick up a gun to fight an occupying army. And there's a case called Crown and Gull, which talks exactly about this, which says, basically this guy shared videos of stuff happening in various war zones and was met with a prosecution under the Terrorism Act and said, well, hold on, I'm only sharing videos of things that are completely lawful under international humanitarian law. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, well, that's as may be, but it doesn't matter. Like the definition of terrorism goes well beyond what is lawful under IHL, right? So I'm going to answer your question in a way that's somewhat critical. I don't think it's particularly useful to endorse the category of terrorism, because that's effectively a category that's invented by our enemies to try and malign freedom fighters. That's basically what it's for, yeah. And so, and if you think about where the term terrorism came from, it emerged out of the French Revolution, right? So it actually emerged out of revolutionary violence, and then it kind of morphed into this thing that our enemies used to, attack Irish republicanism, attack the Palestinian struggle. So I would be hesitant to start endorsing the term terrorism and trying to use it against our enemies, because it's their term. I don't think it's particularly useful for us. There are some other terms from international law that are being wielded to attack Israel and Zionism in a way that's relatively successful. So occupation is the obvious one, but also ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide, right? These are concepts that are, of course, being wielded against Israel as we speak. And it's, of course, the case that states have a duty under international law to use all of their available resources to bring about an end to apartheid, right? So I do think the apartheid framing is somewhat useful, but what I would encourage people to do is to engage with a particular text by a Palestinian-American academic called Noura Erakat. She has a book called Justice for Some, in which she looks at the role of law. And again, we talk about, you correctly talked about the British state. We don't take our lectures from the British state. They're a colonial empire. International law is colonial. It was invented by colonial powers to justify and administer the colonization of the world. And what she talks about very compellingly is that, look, if you're you talked about being on enemy terrain. International law is enemy terrain. International law is the very terrain that oversaw the colonization of Palestine. And so I'd encourage people to read Noura Erakat, and she cites a brilliant essay by a friend of mine called Rob Knox, who's a Marxist academic out of the University of Liverpool. He has an essay called Strategy and Tactics, and he talks about exactly the strategic and tactical question that you're raising, which is, if you claim to be concerned with confronting a colonial empire, if you actually want to defeat it, and you want to use law as part of your strategy, why would you even do that? Why would you allow your horizon, the horizon of your ambitions for what a just world looks like, for what a just outcome looks like, to be limited by the laws as written by your literal enemies, right? So all I would say is, very provocative question, I don't have an answer. All I can do is flip the question back on you and encourage you to think about the extent to which international law was designed by and for colonial empires, the very colonial empires that the Palestinian resistance are fighting. And if we are to succeed, it will be because we see beyond the racist limits imposed on us by a colonial legal regime.
Yeah, there's one problem. Just quickly, can I just say the problem that there is this mainstream media's need for what they think is balance in every single story. So if you have one point of view, you have to have another point of view. And like I have argued, you don't need balance to genocide. You don't need someone to say, yeah, but this is the reason why it's happening. You don't need balance to that. I mean, the criticism that journalists, I mean, Louis Theroux's Settlers, which was by the BBC, is an amazing programme. The Panorama showing SAS war crimes in Afghanistan is an amazing programme that goes against the establishment. But when you come to those daily news programmes, they insist if you have one point of view, you have to have someone with a counterpoint of view, which sometimes I think is just nonsense. I mean, the argument levelled at most journalists is, are you not meant to be impartial and independent? If you are completely independent and have no view on a genocide, you shouldn't be a journalist, in my opinion. Do you know what I mean? Like, what would...
I'm very nervous saying this because I've never spoken publicly before. What I'm going to say is that I am very disappointed in the people of Derry for not standing up for Palestine. I am a child that was born in the 60s, and Derry was always good standing up for people, and my heart is broken that the people of Derry are standing out and walking and protesting for what's happening in Palestine. I can't understand why the people of Derry are broken-hearted, seeing all the children that are dying through bombing and starvation and everything else. And I'm sorry, I don't do this, but I just have to say this because I'm so impassioned about what's happening to the children in Palestine.
Well, I would just say that obviously you are in there and you are standing up, and there's more and more of us who are, and they will be inspired by your stand, and I commend you for it.
So, Conrad, welcome here. It's good to see you here. You were talking about the Palestine Action Congress and stuff in Britain. I'm not sure if you're aware of our campaign is within, right? So there was 15, 16-year campaign against Raytheon, including an occupation where the place was smashed to fuck, it was absolutely destroyed, and those people were all found not guilty and under the law. You were talking earlier about how much evidence you present to the state, yet there's nothing done. After the first trial, at one stage of the first trial, the Raytheon witness, because he was admitting war crimes, the judge stopped the trial and read his rights. It says that you're admitting some absolutely terrible things here. We presented a full book of evidence to the BSNI in regards to Raytheon's activities to prove it was a criminal enterprise, and we've never heard anything back. But I've met with some of the PA people before, and they've come over about any of that information to be useful in those trials, and we all need, we're happy to share it. You know.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's like I said, best defense is a good offense, right? Like,
yeah.
and that's literally what's happening in those trials, right? Like you're met with a charge of criminal damage, and you just flip it and just say, I smashed up some inanimate objects. The company that we smashed up is engaged in the racist mass murder of Palestinians. Like, it's the only way to win.
I think we'll have one more question. Is that okay? Then, yeah. Okay.
This goes on what you said there about international law itself. I suppose just jumping on that, just legally speaking,
suppose I'm reflecting on what you said there, but firstly, I suppose then CGA link and sort of the enforceability of that, how can you actually apply that then to case law on a case-by-case basis? And I suppose then secondly on that, I suppose looking at something that in a sense is colonial, but I suppose then it's every day through case law and through case-by-case basis, are you not amending the law and shaping the law to reflect society as it is? I suppose what I wanted to ask you is using relief from ICJ, for example, and using the cases involved in, is that what starts to build the precedent that allows you to rely on those future cases,
Yeah.
or do you think that these cases not going to the law? Does it need to be actual change in the statute instead?
Yeah, this is a super provocative and thought-provoking question. I don't have a simple answer for you. I mean, basically, it's a very political question. You're sort of asking about the role of law in society. I'm quite skeptical. I think that, again, I'm a communist, right? I think we should, I'm not posing or whatever. I really think that capitalism is just deeply unsatisfying and just, frankly, just shit. It's a shit system. It doesn't meet human needs. And maybe there was a period when it was ascendant and it was better than feudalism, so it emerged out of an inferior system, and fine, there was a kind of trajectory, and now we're on the downward curve. We're decidedly on the downward curve, and capitalism is in crisis, Zionism is in crisis. And so I think my point about horizon is the go-to thing. It's what is your idea of a good society? What is your idea about what does it mean to create a society that's built on human need, meeting human need? And what we currently have is a society that's built upon coercing people into jobs they hate, some of which include building bombs to engage in the mass murder of people because they're the wrong race. That's just fundamentally not good enough. Maybe capitalists are right that everything's fine and we should just continue to administer this hateful, racist, violent system. But if I'm right, if we're right, that no, you should make a society that's not built on accumulating profit for a small number of people who own the means of production. You should just make a society that's built on standing in awe of your fellow human and wanting them to have their needs met. And if that's right, then think about what the bourgeois state is. It's a state that's designed by capitalists to, more than anything else, enforce contracts of employment, right? To force workers to go to work, to smash up strikes when they happen, to smash up Palestine when it gets in the way of American colonial interests or imperialist interests. So I'm not an ultra-leftist and I'm not an anarchist. I think that law and the state is a site of struggle. I don't advocate for abandoning those as terrains of struggle, but I think if you're to intervene, if we are to intervene, we have to do it on the understanding that, I think as one of the comrades said, we are doing so on enemy territory, and understanding what it means to forge a strategy that is seriously alive to the fact that the laws are written by our enemies. What does that mean? The state was designed by and for our enemies. What does that mean, right? So again, there's no easy answers, but it's a very political question. I think some conception of the rule of law, like a society governed by law, is important, is worth retaining. But I'm not posing or being playful when I say that I just think we should overturn existing social relations and create something that's just fun.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Frank, you mentioned that the Palestinian people would be the ones who ultimately secure their own victory. And I applaud that idea. I just wonder where you're getting your optimism from. It doesn't look that way at all. Surely you have to confront that reality.
Absolutely. What is it? Gramsci says, right? Pessimism of the optimism of the, well, I've got it wrong. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will, right? So we have to be intellectually pessimistic, critical, but as far as our volition is concerned and getting up and doing stuff, we have to just be fundamentally optimistic. And I think maybe I'm a bit insane, but I'm full of hope. I think Zionism is dying in front of our eyes. I think it's over. The night is darkest before the dawn. Who can say, God knows what's going to happen, right? But I don't see how Zionism comes back from this. It's coming at a horrific cost to Palestinians. But again, look at 1 million Algerians had to die to get the French out of Algeria. 2 million Vietnamese had to die to get the Yanks out of Vietnam. A horrific number of Palestinians are having to die to defeat this horrific Zionist entity. But in my opinion, it is in a crisis. There's no basis for doubting it's in a crisis. Let's just make it a terminal crisis. Just fucking fight Zionism. Like, there's no alternative. Like, you might be right. You might be right. You might be right. Like, I think I'm right. I think that Zionism is dying in front of our eyes. Their prime minister can't come here because he'll be arrested. Ireland and Spain are saying this is genocide. Like, the BBC is now saying, like, yeah, this is genocide. It's an apartheid state. There's no basis for doubting that now, right? As of July last year, ICJ opinion, yeah, it's apartheid. Like, it's collapsing in front of our eyes. They're losing the Jewish diaspora. You go to New York, you go to places with large Jewish communities, and it's like, I don't want this being done in my name. So these fundamental, like, their ability to recruit soldiers, it's not just that the British government is likely to be forced to prosecute British people. The South African foreign minister said, if you're a dual national, South African, Israeli, and you went to certain military and you come back here, we will arrest you, her words, right? So the Zionist entity can't really recruit from South Africa anymore because they know that South Africa is like, we'll fucking arrest you if you come back here. You go and serve in that colonial military, you're going to be arrested, right? So it's collapsing, but maybe I'm wrong. You're right. I should contend with the sheer scale of the suffering of Palestinians and the fact that it is a genocide and the fact that as we're speaking, people have been murdered because they're deemed a racial threat, right? I don't shy away from that. If you are right that the Palestinians have been defeated, then what we're looking at is a malignant, horrific form of 21st century fascism, where an ethno-state that says it's okay to demographically engineer the racial purity of your population is allowed to continue after having committed a genocide. Like, I don't want to live in a world where such a state survives, so we just have to make it the case that it's
You have one more? We've one more question. Let's go ahead.
Good to hear you, Frank. Good to see you, Alison. Seen your LBC video on YouTube the other day. Interesting. But like, what my question is, and I think everybody else in the room shares the concerns about like international law. There's no regard to international law from the Western governments. Like, you know, in the US, they've got that Leahy law, which, you know, if America is deemed as supporting an entity that's breaking international law, they have to like pull it away straight away. And there's like reports done by the US administration which found that Israel were breaking international law. That report was suppressed recently. David Lammy, that Israel might be breaking international law. On the street released a statement like a day later saying, no, that thing you heard that David Lammy said doesn't actually hear it doesn't happen. So what my concerns is that whenever the ICJ like finally deliver their judgment, if the US and the UK just ignore it, what's left? What can be done then? Because it's like they're going so far as like that, like they ignore the highest court in the world, and if that happens, and they're like, where do we go as a civilization?
I absolutely hear what you're saying, and it kind of relates to what I was saying to the previous question, right? Like, either we're witnessing the emergence of an extremely powerful 21st century fascism, which is going to destroy the norms of liberal legality, or we're capable of kind of resolving the crisis of liberalism. Like, I'm a communist. I don't think that it's possible to resolve the crisis of liberalism. So I think we are entering into a very dark period. Like Rosa Luxemburg said in 1915, right? Socialism or barbarism. And think about 1915, right? That's 1 year into the First World War, which was at that point was the most horrific violence that humanity had seen, right? Working class people from around the world murdering each other with machine guns, right? Like, it was like unprecedented. Like, we're in a newly unprecedented and incredibly risky era. And so I think you're right to be disturbed by the degradation of international law and the way that not just the Zionist entity, but also the United States is presiding over just the evisceration of international law. That is disturbing. But what makes me feel hopeful is what I think I said previously, that Zionism will be defeated on the battlefield, but it's also the case that capitalism will be defeated by the autonomous movement of the international working class, which has no country, and that's what we're discovering, right? The woman at the back who expressed her dismay at the fact that more people in Derry weren't heartbroken. Well, many people in Derry are heartbroken, many people in London are heartbroken, and many people in these places around the world are standing up in the emerging coalition that storms power and makes the world better. Like, that's not an easy answer. Like, it's fucking terrifying. The times that we're living through are terrifying. I don't have easy answers for you, but all we can do is continue to ask ourselves what it means to step into the coalition that stands for universal humanity against the rising tide of fascism. Like, that's it. No pass around. That's all we have.
I want to thank you all. I mean, it was a gorgeous day today. You could have easily sat in your gardens. Instead, you all came here, and I think that says a lot that this room is packed. And I want to thank the organisers for that. I want to thank them for inviting me here. But most of all, I want to thank Frank. A lot of those subjects were really difficult, but I think that what one is, I suppose, one of your real talents is an ability to explain what could be quite complicated law in a way that is not just impassioned and you can feel how much you believe in it, but also I think is really relatable to everyone in this room. And we've all learned something, I think, from this. So I think the biggest round of applause should go to yourself. Thank you. Yeah, hold on.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
Sorry, could you stay a wee minute, please? Rose, can we just wait for a wee second?